We are live. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Refresh. It's our time to connect, to be inspired, learn something, and ultimately feel a little bit, maybe a lot better for this time we spent together. Thanks for joining us, because this is what Generation W is all about. I cannot believe it, but this is our 15th week of coming together, seeking the power of connection to refresh our spirits and, of course, inform our minds. We have incredible people who have joined us. I am so grateful to each and every one of them, as I know you are as well, because we've really learned a lot and how we can better understand our world and, of course, how we can improve our lives and those of the people around us. And today is no exception. I'm so excited about today. The earlier refrains of we just don't know are still with us. Living in a daily world of uncertainty where every day the clock begins again as we seek to avoid the virus is absolutely pressure and stress. We do not get bonus points other than not getting the virus by being good yesterday. We have to be good today, and we have to be good tomorrow. Not too long ago, I was especially focused, like much of the country was, on my friends from the Northeast, right? They were ravaged by COVID. Their worry was my worry. Their anxiety was my anxiety. And in my little bubble here, at least there in Jacksonville, Florida, I felt pretty safe. Well, guess what? So much for that, because now it is my state, Florida, grabbing many of the headlines. The record-setting numbers of new cases truly is unsettling. But I have to tell you, I'm feeling a little bit safer today. I am here in Colorado, where everyone is wearing masks. You cannot enter a store without one. Each store has a sanitizer, and people are respectfully distancing. There is this concerted community effort, and you feel it, and it speaks to respect. And you feel this greater sense of kindness and concern. And I gotta tell you, it feels nice. I want to especially thank Southwest Airlines. I was nervous. And talk about kindness and concern, their boarding process, their seat allocation, the wearing of masks by everyone on the plane. It was clean, it was sanitized. You know, it's just a reminder that we can come together and help each other be healthy. And speaking of health, I think I already said it, but I'll say it again. I am so excited about today. We have two phenomenal doctors who I have had the privilege to get to know recently, who have dedicated their lives to women's health. And let me just say this about women's health. It is about all of us. I hope, Chris, you're with us, because Chris joins us every week and I love his company. But women's health is, yes, very personal, and yet at the same time, a global concern. You know, right now, 1 in 3 essential workers are women. And much of the childcare is, yes, handled by women. 70% of home chores handled by women. I had a great conversation this past week with reporter Keitha Nelson at WTLV, who was working on this piece regarding the COVID's impact on women. It is a real concern for all of us, because you see, women's hands do hold up the world, and we need to make sure that these hands, our hands, are strong and well. So today, Dr. Stephanie Faubion, she is the director of Mayo Clinic Center for Women's Health. She is the chair of the Department of Medicine, one of the few female department chairs at the Mayo Clinic. We're so proud and inspired by her accomplishments, achievements, her leadership. She's also the medical director of the North American Menopause Society. She is an author, a researcher, a mother of 3 amazingly accomplished daughters, and a true champion for women's health. And she is partnered today with another amazing woman. I adore Dr. Jackie Thielen. She's the founding member of the Women's Health Specialty Center in Jacksonville, Florida, of the Mayo Clinic. Her prior work was in Rochester, Minnesota, the home base, the HQ for the Mayo Clinic, where she served to help establish the Women's Health Center there. She has dedicated her professional career to help women, their health, sexual function. Why can't I say this word? Do you think this is Freudian? We don't have to talk about it.
Function.
Sexual functioning. Focused on she's focused on the next generation with her work that she does with medical students, and her passion, their passion, is a palpable one. So, ready to go? Let's begin. I mentioned the significant impact that COVID is having on women in particular. Perhaps, ladies, we can start there. What are you seeing that is of greatest concern to you? Who wants to start us off?
I certainly can. In general, it's no surprise. Women for decades, centuries, have been taking on everything. it just happens this time. It's also the issues that come with the pandemic, where we're enclosed and we have to take care of everything. But to be honest, women have been strong and selfless forever. That's in our DNA. We just keep doing, keep working, do what's necessary, keep the kids happy, keep the home happy as much as we can. The challenge becomes is this resiliency that women have has a limit. And that's the difficulty, is everyone's limit has only so much, and what happens when you're at that end of your limit. And that's when you see the emotional or physical breakdown for women. And we certainly, I think, are going to see the impact of today, not necessarily today, although we do see it in increased suicides and so on. I even personally had a patient who attempted suicide during this COVID time. But it's really what we're going to see a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, in terms of how it impacts not just their physical health, but their well-being. And that includes their employment, the impact on women as a group.
Yeah, I'm particularly concerned. I agree, Jackie. I think your points are well taken. And I'm also concerned about women's professional development and career track. I think that because women are bearing the brunt of a lot of this, the home care responsibilities, the child care, the child education, elder care, that I think we are less productive at work than our male counterparts are, and are probably going to derail a little bit in terms of our professional paths. And there have been a couple of articles written about this already, about female scientists being particularly disadvantaged because they are unable to be in the lab right now, as opposed to some of their male counterparts. So I think you're right. I don't think we will see the full outcome of this for quite some time, and it may disadvantage an entire generation of women.
Yeah, that is not, that's not uplifting, actually, to be able to hear that. The question is, I think, what can we do to help make that not the case, right? We can't afford to lose a whole generation of women. We've made so much progress. And yet here we are, in a sense, again, holding up society and community in the most essential ways at a very steep price.
One of the first things I tell women when they come in the office is you do have to make yourself a priority. And that is very, very hard for women, especially in times of stress, because we can see it in everybody else, but we can't see it in ourselves. So making yourself a priority, recognizing that it's okay. In fact, it's not being selfish. It's actually allowing you to be your best by making your nutrition or your exercise or your what we would call self-care a priority, because that's typically the first thing that gets crossed off the list, is that 30 minutes of exercise, I don't have time for that. And that really has to be higher on the list of priorities.
Yeah. And I think giving ourselves a break, that not everything has to be perfect right now. I think women take that on a lot, that no ball needs to touch the ground and everything needs to keep running as it would before. And I think we need to give ourselves a little leeway there, that things do not have to be perfect right now. Not everything has to be done. And we just need to keep moving forward. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I think women are particularly bad at that as well. And saying that I'm overwhelmed right now, I need some help from others, from family, from their spouse, from their kids. So really everybody can pitch in, and it doesn't all have to fall on the female of the household.
Right. The challenge I find is women think they can only do it right? Yeah. Even stacking the dishwasher, it has to be my way.
That is such a great point. Or I am the only one who could do the homework with my kids because I do it better. And I had to learn that because I was commuting to another city for work. And I was like, I can't do all of this. And if my husband does the homework with the kids and it's not as good, well, in my estimation, right? You got to let it go. You got to let it go.
You got to let a few things go. The laundry is another one, but yeah.
So let me just take a minute here. First of all, let's welcome and say hello to our Mayo colleagues. So glad that you're joining us. Chris, glad you are here. You know, we have just so you ladies know, we have people come from all over the world. Bridget, who lives in Ghana, I love that she's joining us. Nikki Glover, I hope you're healthy. She had a little bit of a bout. Marianne, Erin, Jennifer, we want to thank you all. And we're going to get into some of the research and health issues and specifics around women. Please feel free to send questions. This is an unbelievable time to have access to these brilliant women. And I want to make sure that everyone can have a chance to learn as we learn together, if that's okay. So we talked a lot yesterday when we were kind of, I don't want to say rehearsing, we didn't rehearse, we kind of like, we're trying to figure out what was most important to this audience. We talked about research and how current research, or the lack thereof, has a huge impact on the health of women today. I know, Stephanie, you've spent a lot of time in this area as well.
Yeah, I think, well, many people may not know, but the National Institutes of Health just came up with a mandate in 2016, that 4 years ago, that researchers had to report the sex of the cells they were using, of the animals that they were using, or of the humans that they were using in their research. So it's only been in the last 4 years that you had to report the sex of the participants or animals or cells in your study. But the problem is that even though they're reported now, researchers don't always examine the results of their studies by sex. So as a result, we still don't have all the information that we need about so many things about women's health. One example would be that of the drugs pulled off the market due to side effects in the last decade, the large majority are due to side effects in women. And why is that? It's because these drugs were never studied in women. And so we have a whole, all of our medical knowledge, we really have to go back and really look deeply into and understand whether or not we truly understand the differences between men and women in terms of testing for disease, in terms of disease processes, in terms of treatments for disease. So we're really quite a bit behind the 8 ball and just starting to pick up on this knowledge. So we've got a ways to go for sure.
That really speaks to this idea of what is women's health. And women's health really is not just the parts that we all women have in common, like breasts and a uterus, but it also has to do with the things that we perhaps have the same as men, but maybe we have more prevalence of these diseases like breast cancer, like autoimmune disorders. And it also requires, you know, how our bodies metabolize or are impacted by things differently than men, such as medications or even how we process heart disease differently. And so when it comes to women's health, I think a lot of people just think about bikini medicine. And that's really what, you know, gynecologists, yeah, a lot of their focus is on the reproductive organs and on the breast. But generally speaking, we're talking about all these other parts of us that women physiologically, because of how we're made DNA and that X chromosomes, that we function differently. And that's the part that Stephanie speaks to, is that from a research standpoint, really hasn't been elucidated in a lot of those disease processes.
Okay, so I hear this, I get it. I've spent time focusing on the things that we don't see that impact us, right? We hear about, I know we have great advocates who are working on behalf of women's heart health. And we know that some doctors will not be able to see or diagnose women's heart symptomology as being heart issues because it's not what they normally see in men. And then you have women of color, right, which extends it yet another dimension. What do we do? I mean, first of all, we have to be aware, right? So maybe we have to be aware, but what do we do? How do we advocate understanding that there are these gaps as the medical community sees us, right? How do we help ourselves be safer?
We have to learn ourselves. We have to educate ourselves that we have to be the ones to ask the questions. We really have to be the captain of our personal process. Doctors know a lot. Granted, we know a lot, but we don't know everything. But you have to be willing to have a relationship with your provider, whether if that's an MD or a nurse practitioner or whomever, who's willing to think about those questions for you. But then you also have to educate yourself. What are the less typical signs of heart disease that women see? It's about fatigue. It's about sweating. It could be, jaw pain. That's not the crushing elephant on your chest that we sort of would commonly think about as heart disease, as you sort of bring up. Stephanie and I spent a lot of time educating providers as well as patients in those situations of how do women present or do differently. But that takes time. And unfortunately, and I think Stephanie would agree with me, back in the early 2000s when this whole hormone therapy is bad for you period of time, that a lot of providers and actually educators stopped learning about women because it was too scary of a proposition to even think about hormones. And so we actually have a generation of providers who really haven't been taught a lot of this information. And so they're having to reteach themselves too. So it's not because they didn't want to, but oftentimes they didn't know better either to ask those questions. So women are in a tough place because they have to find a provider, but they also have to teach themselves.
Wow. So you go ahead, Steph.
Well, I would say women have to advocate for themselves. And I think that many times when women are not doing well physically, emotionally, they know something's wrong. And you got to trust your gut. And if you know something's wrong and is being missed by your provider, then I think you do have to be persistent, because you may have an atypical presentation of heart disease, and you may have a jaw pain or just fatigue. Instead of the pain, the crushing chest pain. So trust your gut, don't give up. Make sure you're persistent in saying in your message that something's wrong and you need help. So go ahead, Donna, sorry.
No, don't be sorry to me. I was just going to say, you both of you were so nice to put together some graphics for all of us in terms of a rubric, if you will. And people are starting to ask these questions about how you take charge of your health. And the first one that you spoke about was being prepared. Come to your provider's office with your medical history, list of medications, questions to be answered. I guess we're going to add more to this, Jackie, is we're going to say we have to be educated. I can just say this, and we have had this discussion, the three of us, about being women. It's like one more thing we have to take on, right? We have to do this. And it would be so nice if we didn't have to do as much as we had to do. But unfortunately, as you say, this is where we are. And so there you have it.
Yeah. I just, in fact, saw a patient this morning, and it's not even about menopause. It was a cancer patient who is a breast cancer patient at 36. And the whole fertility piece, to do it, not to do it, how do you do that? There's not a lot of conversation or set guidelines. So, there's so many areas that women have to be their own advocate to seek out questions or answers to their questions. And as much as we as a profession try to cover all these bases, we don't do everything very well. And so all I can do as a female provider is encourage women not to give up and to push forward, and they often want to help others. And that was the conversation she had with me, this patient, about how can I help the next 30-some-year-old who's now going through this, because right. I feel like I had to invent the wheel. And so I think when it comes to advocacy, women helping women is one of those avenues.
Right. So here's two questions just came up, and it's not which are, and they're related. The first one from Jack and Fa says, can you speak to the disparity in healthcare from a socioeconomic and ethnic perspective? And I'm going to tie that to this other question from one of my dearest friends in the whole wide world. And this is a very personal issue for her, because she says, what happens when you do all of these things and you're still dismissed? How do we look at biases in the system itself? And they're related because One relates to an African-American woman who had symptoms that and consistently advocated and the doctors did not see, and sadly resulted in her death. And I think what people are saying is yet another layer, right, in our healthcare system is how do we deal with this disparity on top of the gender disparity? And if you happen to be, again, as I said, a woman of color, it's of tremendous concern.
Right. There have been
and it's a pressure, right?
Multiple studies to support what you're saying, not only from a gender perspective, sex and gender perspective, but also from a racial and ethnic perspective. And that just magnifies all the biases that are out there. So we know they exist. We know, for example, that women coming in with knee arthritis, if you just show a doctor the x-rays, and they don't know the sex of the person, that actually, if they do know the sex of the person, they're far more likely to recommend a knee replacement if they know the sex is male, but not to recommend it if they know the sex is female. And that's just one example. But I think we have to understand that there are biases in the system, and that things can get missed. And as women, that's very frustrating. And as women of color, that would be even more of a disadvantage and a bias against us. But I think you have to understand that what you have to say is important. And one of the messages that's on our bullet points is if a provider isn't listening to you, get another provider. You really have to be your own advocate. And if somebody won't listen to you despite multiple attempts to say it in different ways, I don't think you're hearing me. I don't think you understand what I'm saying. Maybe I can clarify a little bit better. Can you explain this to me one more time? If that is not working for you, you flat out need to find another provider who will be your advocate. And I promise you there are people out there that will be. But we just have to keep battling the system. And as physicians and medical providers, we do get training in unconscious bias now. That never used to happen. That is a new thing. We all get that now. So hopefully with education and understanding that there are biases and that we have unconscious biases we're not aware of, we can ultimately get through this. But right now, you got to be your own advocate too.
It may not even just always be biases. It's sometimes just a lack of education on that provider's role, because even, for example, recognizing that Blacks are more likely to develop colon cancer, so many are advocating screening starting at age 45 instead of age 50. Well, if you're a provider that, you know, in your mind's eye, you just do the guideline, start screening at age 50, it doesn't matter if the person's white or Black, you're just going to follow that guideline, even though that's not necessarily the up-to-date understanding. And so sometimes it's about a lack of knowledge. So I think our patients find them in a difficult position, and I wholeheartedly believe, along with Stephanie, that if you're not getting the answers to your questions, and they could be the nicest person, it still does require potentially second opinion and or seeking another provider to give you a different point of view.
Right.
And a good provider should never balk at you asking for a second opinion.
That's that is a really important point, right? We should all understand that. If it's a good provider, they would say, by all means, this is something you should do. Mm-hmm. But often we don't get that. Often it's kind of like we're insulting or we're being judgmental or whatever. So that's a really great point. We got lots and lots of questions. So let me just say hi to Tony Fox. Hi, Tony. I'm glad you're with us. Here's a question. Understanding that we don't do well caring for ourselves, what are the key tests, checks, screenings we must keep up with? And I think, Sherry, we have a graphic on this one too. What's in our must-do list to be, I guess this is it's part of being prepared.
Well, the preventive regular guidelines, for sure. We should always do mammogram screening, colon cancer screening, those kinds of things. There you go, yeah. And cervical cancer screening, that's one that's really changed, and a lot of women are still feeling like they have to go in and get their annual PAP. Not all women need a pap smear on an annual basis, depending on their clinical situation as well as testing. So that's one that's been changed. So I know a lot of women who avoid the doctor's office because they don't want a pelvic exam. But if you tell them, well, you may not need one every year, then it's a little bit easier to go in to get that annual mammogram. Mammograms, though, at that age of 50 at least and above, well, the question about at what age do we stop. But yeah, those are things that we know help. Are they perfect? No. Do we have false positives? Yes. But, at the end of the day, us doctors can only do what we know helps the majority of people. And as sad as it is that we miss things, majority of time, we don't.
And so back to knowing your numbers too. So a lot of people forget that heart disease is the #1 killer of women. A lot of people think it's cancer, it's heart disease. So knowing your numbers that put you at risk for heart disease is really important. So what is your sugar? What is your blood pressure? What is your cholesterol? Those are super important. Other than that, you should smoke, of course, take care of maintaining your weight and exercise.
Yeah, what is your BMI? That's another number you should know.
Yep, exactly.
And how often should we be getting those numbers?
The guidelines show that it's really every couple of years for some of these if you're low risk, but if you're higher risk, you might need to get those numbers checked more often. So certainly if you have high blood pressure, you would need to be following with your medical provider a little bit more often. But a screen every couple of years is appropriate if you're otherwise low risk.
Stephanie, one of those numbers that we talk about that is one of those things that women don't want to talk about is their waist circumference.
Well, yeah, that's a hard one.
That's hard.
Are we supposed to do that? Because I don't really want to do that. Just want to let you know.
Well, I don't think that women necessarily need to know it, but it's one of those things that grows in midlife, a number that gets bigger, and more studies are showing how that number in particular, the waist circumference or the waist to hip ratio, is associated with heart disease risk in women. So again, another point that we really just need to watch what's contributing to heart disease risk, and weight around the midsection is one of them.
Okay, now I know. I guess I'm going to have to do that. I don't know. Here's another question for you. It is really funny how we can let some of our vanity impact our ability to do the right things for our health, right? I don't want to know that I've gained another inch around my waist. Thank you very much. And therefore I might miss something, or 2 for that matter, whatever.
You probably know it by the way your clothes are fitting, right?
Yeah, it'd be helpful if you can explain a little bit in more depth what a BMI is and what a high number indicates, if you could.
The BMI is your weight in kilograms divided by your height, meters squared. So it's a number that comes up, and particular numbers, if they're on a range, most women don't have a BMI of 18, but 26 and below is considered more normal weight. At 26, 27, 28, we're talking overweight. And above 30 is considered obese. And then above 40 is actually considered morbidly obese.
And Jackie, explain what BMI stands for.
Oh, body mass index. Sorry about that. So hence your weight divided by your height. So it's the mass of your body. And it is a sort of a scary number. It is helpful as a physician because it gives us a sense, because a body shape is only so much, but it can be different depending on how tall or short you are, makes a difference. I think, my personal feeling, however, is insurance companies have used that number to okay certain medications or surgeries, depending on what BMI you're on. And if you're just under the number, does that not allow you to have insurance coverage, let's say for a medication that can help with weight loss? I think it's a little bit too easy sometimes to come up with just a number that defines you.
Well,
But
maybe another discussion too is where women hold that weight, because that's also a player in terms of heart disease risk. So before menopause, women tend to have what we call a gynoid pattern of weight distribution, and that's where we tend to have more weight in our hips and our thighs, and that, believe it or not, is healthier. And after menopause, that weight redistributes to the middle section, and we have a more android pattern, meaning a more male-like pattern of weight distribution. And that's not so great, where we hold weight around our midsection. That's associated with heart disease risk. So that person, two different people, one with a gynoid pattern of weight around the hips and thighs, and another of most of the weight being around the midsection, could have the same BMI. So that's why it's maybe not the most accurate way to say who's at risk for future disease related to that weight and who isn't. So that's why BMI may not be a perfect measure, but it is more accurate than just weight alone.
That's helpful. Erin wants to know, what are some good, reliable online resources for women's health issues?
Oh, well, the North American Menopause Society is menopause.org, of course. So there are lots of good resources there, including how to find a medical provider. MayoClinic.org is also a really great resource for any number of topics, including women's health topics.
Okay, so Erin, hopefully that will help you. Teresa Graham has a very specific question. How do you fight weight gain while on the estrogen patch?
Okay, well, I am passionate about that one.
I'm going to let Stephanie, because I know this is a topic of much interest to her.
Yes. Okay, so the first thing is the estrogen patch does not cause weight gain. Midlife causes weight gain, but the estrogen patch and hormone therapy in general is weight favorable for the most part. It's not a weight loss drug, don't get me wrong, but it is, if anything, weight favorable. So you will not be gaining weight related to the estrogen patch. Having said that, most women on an estrogen patch are in midlife, postmenopausal, and that's why they're on the patch. And that is the main reason for weight gain, is the aging process more than the loss of hormones. And the best way to combat that is to be really proactive about the lifestyle changes. And I know that's probably not what everybody wants to hear, but the only way to lose weight in midlife is to reduce your caloric intake. And the way to keep it off is to exercise. So you can't exercise your way out of it. It's not possible. You have to cut calories to get your weight back down, but you need exercise to help you maintain it. So it really comes back down to diet and exercise.
Sorry. Some women will experience bloating as a side effect to estrogen, and that is very different than the idea of weight gain.
Okay. All right. So I guess I could start measuring my weight as soon as I start eating less. I got it. It's not something we don't know, but we do have to be reminded of.
Fair is the more you work, your body does sort of reset. And so then the more you have to do. And so it feels like it's like you're climbing the mountains in Colorado because you just have to continually work harder. And that can be frustrating.
Well, I think it's also important to tell women that because one of the most frustrating things is that women come in and say, I'm doing the same thing that I've always done and I'm putting on weight. And I say, exactly. If you are only doing what you've always done in the past, it won't work anymore, because guess what? The rules of your body have changed and no one told you. So really in midlife, the rules of your body change. And you can't just do what you've always done because it won't work. So in other words, you're burning fewer calories, and for a number of reasons, because you're losing a little bit of muscle mass, your metabolism slows a little bit, and midlife women don't move as much. We're busy, we're sitting in our chair like I am for 10 hours a day. So we don't move as much. So there's a number of reasons why we're not burning as many calories. So that means the formula has changed and you really just have to do more, eat less and exercise more.
Right. So I did encourage people to ask specific questions if they had them. And so this is a very specific one. Maybe we'll all learn from it. Gwen wants to know if your waist to hip ratio is less than 1, but you have an overweight BMI, is your heart disease risk lower?
So waist
Okay.
is less than 1.
Okay, so basically your waist is smaller than your hips, but your BMI is still in the overweight category?
Correct.
Yeah, less unfavorable. So there was a recent study that came out on this specifically, and less unfavorable if you still have a waistline, basically, meaning your fat distribution is not as unfavorable, but probably still a little above a normal weight person. So there's gradations of what's okay. So yeah, you're probably better off than somebody that is a pure apple shape. But you could be better if you're back in the normal weight range.
Okay, that's probably helpful. Which brings us, we should probably talk a little bit about more food and diet. We talked a little bit about microbiome as well. There's so many different diets out there, different food. We're learning more that different people's DNA or genetic makeup has a impact, or people deal with different foods differently. Their body reacts, right? So of course, everybody wants to know what the miracle cure is.
Yeah, and if I had the miracle cure, I would be sitting on the beach in Tahiti instead of my office. That is the challenge, is and our bodies are all different, and nutritionally, yes, there are some basics that we need, but the metabolism on an individual basis, and it may be about the microbiome in terms of how we metabolize those nutrients, does probably have a role. And a lot of it has been trial and error on an individual basis. And people do try different things, be it fasting or the keto diet or whatever have you. Stephanie famously says the best diet is one that you'll stick to. And I think that is the challenge, is that when we change our eating habits, invariably we tend to revert back to our old eating habits. And so then weight does come back on. And
Yes.
so I don't have I'm probably one of those people who it's probably like all my patients. I carry a little bit more in the middle, more than I used to, but I also know that I'm eating differently. I'm a stress eater. I'm also probably not exercising as much as I should. And so, yeah, the end result is I'm not going to get the same results if I do all those things.
Right. So you're not going to say keto, vegan, gluten-free.
I typically say the Mediterranean diet, which is, of course, low protein, high veggies, some good oils.
And I think the key for midlife women is avoiding carbs, avoiding simple carbohydrates. My mantra is also midlife women can't eat carbs. Sorry.
And the problem with that, of course, is wine, because we all like our wine. And so tell a woman that she shouldn't drink wine, that is problematic.
Right. Okay. So another question came in, but before I do that, I just want to remind everybody, here we are with Refreshed. All glad you're with us. Today, we have the remarkable privilege time with these two amazing Mayo Clinic doctors who've dedicated their careers really to women's health, research, education, and we're getting a good dose of that today. So thank you very much. I want to thank you to the Mayo colleagues, and I do also want to mention that I see Dr. Allison Bruce is with us. She is another one of my faves. I am a real fangirl of her and her work that she does in the dermatology clinic. I believe she leads that as well.
Female chairs, yes, she is.
Right, so she is another amazing, amazing person, and her husband actually has been with us on Generation W, and Allison was going to be doing a workshop with us this year, but I think in light of our change, we're going to figure out some new things to do with her as well, because her learning and teaching is also spectacular. Right? I mean, we got to call it out, right?
Yeah,
awesome. Lisa Morrow, she wants to know explain what cortisol is and how do we lower those levels? How does cortisol impact our overall health?
Well, cortisol is one of the stress hormones that we have. And it's not that we go around measuring cortisol and try to target it specifically, but it is more a manifestation of stress. So cortisol levels being high can cause some problems, including increasing your insulin levels. And when your insulin level is higher, you get hungry and you eat more. So lowering stress is the key, honestly. And I know Jackie can speak to the importance of resilience and stress management, but really it is about controlling your stress level.
Yeah, that whole fight or flight process, when that's activated, you tend to do things just to protect yourself. And for many of us, eating is one of those things. And so it really is a factor in the process. But stress management, what it is really about resiliency. It's about learning a skill to lower the physiologic fight or flight that's in your body. It's not about just doing meditation, or it can include meditation, but it's really about how do you find peace, a level of a lack of reaction within your body to your outside world. And so women can do that in various ways. Sometimes it's yoga, sometimes it's knitting, sometimes it's a matter of just guided imagery. But really being aware of what's going on in your body in terms of the tension or the level of angst in a way. And is your body tight, on guard, or is it fully relaxed? And is not only your body relaxed, but your breathing relaxed and your thought processes relaxed. Because when you engage all those areas, yeah, your body comes out of that primitive fight or flight mode, and that invariably will likely impact that cortisol need to eat.
I did not know that cortisol was related to eating. That explains a lot, right? All of a sudden, I'm here with you. I just said, okay, let me just put my shoulders back a little bit.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of women, our attention is outside ourselves. And what mindfulness is about being focused intention. We can be focused, but intentionally be focused and calming. And I think that's a skill. A lot of women do not have that just innately. We're not all perfect. We're not. But I have come to learn from friends how to at least give myself an opportunity during the day to sort of come back to my baseline. And I tend to be probably an anxious person at baseline anyways. But if I continue to be anxious throughout the day, there's a point where I might implode. And that's probably not a good thing. So periodically during the day, if you can find your baseline again, you're less likely to get to that point where you can't handle things.
Right. I think you said, Jackie, at one point, women are doers and will take it on until they break. It reminds me of my little fish in the fish tank. They will eat as much food as I give them until they die. How do we break that cycle?
Self-awareness. And I think that's being in my 50s is different than being in my 30s, because back then I was a doctor working full time. I had 3 boys under 3. I'm like, go, go, go. I didn't have the awareness or the self-awareness to say, wait a second, I'm physically and mentally not going to be able to handle that, until I got sick in a way, because I ended up with a child who needed a little special needs after I got pregnant. And then I got my gallbladder out, and I got my appendix out, maybe sharing too much stuff, personal stuff. But it was like one after another. My body was trying to tell me, hey, wait a second. You got to sort of slow down. And I really made changes in my life at that point and started to work less, really, even though I loved work. For my choice, for my physical choice, my family's choice, I had to make really tough decisions. And I think it's important for women to know that they can make those decisions.
And it's also giving ourselves permission to say no. I think we are so bad at that as women. And anytime anyone asks anything of us, we say, well, maybe not today, but I can do that for you tomorrow, without even stopping to think, is this in my best interest to do one more thing? And do I have the bandwidth to do it? And so, so learn how to say no gracefully. And there's the yes, no, yes, or yes, the yes, no, yes sandwich. So yes, that's a really important cause. unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to take that on right now, but keep me in mind for the future. So it's the yes, no, yes sandwich on saying no to things. So protect yourself a little bit.
You cannot feel guilt about that. You know, at the end of the day, like we said early on, it really is, you have one life. You have to choose it wisely in terms of what you fill it with.
Right. Right. And we tend to overstuff the bag, but there's part of us that actually embraces that. Let me go into this idea of perfection. Joy writes in, I am concerned that this feeling of having to do it all perfectly is making people choose to send their children back to school, even when the optics show that it is so dangerous and that the choices are being made because people must work and do all the things that we do, and not for educational reasons. So I would probably say I'm hearing a lot of educational reasons. We don't want kids to fall behind. I would like to know what our medical experts think about children going back to full open schools without masks in some places and without enough social distancing.
Yikes, that sounds like a loaded one. Well, I can tell you that you know, my youngest child is about to go back to her senior year in college, and they have decided to open the school, and they will all go back, and they will all apparently be tested and masked and whatnot. So we'll see how that goes. I think that's a little bit of a social experiment. But in terms of going back to school, I think for many reasons, getting back to normal is important. However, putting 30 kids in a classroom without masks doesn't seem the wisest thing. So I think there is middle ground there where kids can re-engage in education and maybe not in their own home. But I definitely think masking and social distancing is going to continue to be important. Have we figured out how to control this epidemic or pandemic yet? Not really, not adequately. So I think there's a lot of unknowns yet. I don't know, Jackie, if you have anything else to add.
No, I mean, I do think that there's unknowns. The good news, of course, is the numbers. If you look at the statistics, children are not as having the same difficulty with COVID infection as adults. And so there is understanding that there is this wish to get them back into school because they are not deemed a significant risk population.
But they may be their grandparents. So.
But they might, but we don't know that necessarily. So I'm still of the mindset that masks should be used in that kind of a setting. I do think that we cannot neglect, and that's the other point of this process, or the other side of the coin, is the impact on kids long term for not being in school. And we can't ignore some of the other points with regards to their nutrition that they may not be getting at home, or the supervision they're not getting at home, the educational slowing that they may have. They're losing ground in terms of staying up with peers that perhaps have more financial bandwidth to do some of these things. I don't know the answer to the questions, but I do worry, like everybody else does, about the risks to the children, not just from COVID, but from the other bad things that happen just because they're not in school.
Right. There is all right. There's all, and we talked about this as for women. I think, Stephanie, you started out by saying that the economic risks, the job risk for women from COVID could be generational. I think what I'm hearing you say, Jackie, this is the same thing for our kids, that there is the disease itself, which creates an enormous amount of instability right now, but the follow-on factors, which we are starting to experience and see, are also exponential. And how do we balance all of that? You guys are you're kind of in the inner sphere. How do you both handle the stress of being at the core, right? You know, health professionals at one of our most respected, revered, looked to institutions, both being moms, right? Both wanting to take care of your patients. How do you de-stress?
Good question.
Probably not the right person to ask that.
Well, I'll go first because Stephanie also just moved to Jacksonville, so she's got double duty stress. For me, My kids luckily are adults. They haven't been at home, although they were home for 2 months during the worst of COVID because they were doing online classes. And my senior will be doing his last semester of college online. He opted not to go back to school. His school gave him choice, actually, go back to classes or do online. For as far as distressing, I have my dog. As simple as that. I spend a lot of time when I'm not at work caring for him. And as a mom, I was always a carer, right? So I feel better when I'm doing something. And so, yeah, my dog, Scout, is very, very pampered. And he follows me throughout my day. But it gives me a sense of calmness that I'm seeking. And so I also, now that I live in Jacksonville, get an opportunity to swim. And so I have a pool that I never used to have. And so between the dog and the ability to swim or go for a walk, really step out of my routine, does help me sort of regenerate some sense of energy that I can sort of say, okay, I can move on to taking on all these other things.
Yeah, I have to say I use exercise. That is the one thing that I kind of calm down with. So Donna, what about you?
Me, definitely exercise, definitely. And reading. I love to read. I feel like reading transports you to different places. I mean, I watch a lot of Netflix, but there's just something about reading a great book that puts your mind somewhere else. And I love that adventure, especially because we're not all traveling as much anymore anyway, right?
Sure.
So that's what I do. Thanks for asking. Somebody asked, you talked about resiliency. How do you build resiliency? And how do you figure out what works for you? That's like a very tactical question.
And that's a very hard question because resiliency is, I believe, a learned skill. Mm-hmm. Most of us don't have it innately. Now, there are some people who, I'm amazed by the women I've seen who come in with these horrible diagnoses and they're like fighting and in happy moods and they're just, I'm going to just keep doing what I need to do. Some of them are just saying that. Others actually feel that. And those that just feel that, that's hard to bottle up. I wish I could, because I do think that it's not easy. And some of the colleagues I've come across over the years who have taught me about resiliency, they would be the first ones to tell you that, you know, they have to learn it too. It's something you have to put in your life on a daily basis and practice it. And over time, you get better at it. You can't just do it day one and be perfect. And again, it's not about being perfect. It's about getting started.
Right, because if you think you have to be perfect, you'll never go, right?
I think it's being understanding when you're feeling a little stressed and kind of looking at yourself objectively, going, I'm feeling a little stressed. Why is that? You know, and sort of taking a step back and looking at the situation as if you were someone else, and just looking at it without judging the situation. And that can take the emotion out of it a little bit, and that's part of what the exercise of being resilient is like. So it's really kind of really detaching the emotional content from whatever the situation is and just letting it go by. So sometimes it's just taking a little pause in the middle of your day and taking some deep breaths and recentering yourself. That's a start.
That's a good start. And that's something we can all do.
Yeah.
Right? We can all do it. And I think we all, Stephanie, appreciate like a simple task that we can do that gets us started on the road to being better. Like, right? We just got to take that first step. It's really critical. We talked about it. I'm sorry?
First part is just acknowledging or even recognizing when you're feeling stressed.
Right. Right. And sometimes we don't.
Yeah.
The second is really, you don't need a 30-minute, yoga session. You can do just a few minutes of deep breathing and self-reflection. And that can be, again, a start along feeling better.
That's helpful. Before we go, we talked just briefly, it's terrible to bring this up at the end, but we talked a little bit about aging. All of us are aging. Our 20-year-olds that are in there, our 30, our 40, our 50, we're all aging. We have a different sense of aging at different stages of our life. I loved, Stephanie, when you said we treat our cars better than we treat our bodies. I loved that. I mean, I loved it because it's a smack in the face that says, hello, what are we doing?
Right, right. And, you know, I think it's just acknowledging that we as women take care of everything else, including getting the oil changed in the car, but really have you stop to think, did you take care of yourself in the same way? And yes, you go to the doctor, and yes, you may get your pap smear and your mammogram, but did you really listen to the recommendations of, you really have to take more time for yourself, you really have to exercise more, because that actually takes more intention and more work. Yes, lifestyle stuff takes work, but I promise you it will pay off in the end. And so instead of just counting your doctor's visit as the oil change, you really have to think about it as more of a daily maintenance schedule than a once a year run in and check everything under the hood type of thing.
Right. Jackie, you had some specific thoughts about aging.
I think I'm thinking about this in the context of menopause, because in midlife, we have something that really happens to us that changes the rules, and that is menopause. The loss of that regular hormonal pattern that we had that worked so well for the majority of our life up until our 40s, 50s. And what really physiologically happens is sort of an accelerated aging process without estrogen. And women feel it from head to toe. And I can't tell you how often I hear from women, I didn't really understand that this was going to impact all of me. They knew their periods were going to go away. Check, I can wear white shorts. But you know, the real understanding of how your body physically changes certainly was one that a lot of women don't understand. And there are things we can do to try to slow down that accelerating process. And as we talked about a lot of these physical things that we can do: exercise, eating right. The use of hormones, whether or not we use them, that's always a conversation that really needs to be had with your provider. And so I'll put in 2 cents for that. Hormones are not the world's worst thing. In fact, we have them. Women are meant to have estrogen. The question becomes, are you currently the right person for them? And that's something that needs to be discussed with your provider. But aging, can't run away from it. And as I've aged now and I look more and more like my sisters, who are about 10 years older than me, I'm like, dang, I didn't realize I would eventually look like my sister Maria, but I do. And so there's a part that is in control and there's a part that is not. And I'll have to come to the understanding, or even for myself, to say that that's okay. I can't control everything.
I think that's great. And that does, you said, you know, you can have a whole session just on that, and perhaps we can talk about doing that. On the other end of the spectrum, last question. Somebody asked about maternal bias. What does a woman need to know when they're considering or are pregnant? When they're considering becoming pregnant? Is there a maternal bias?
I'm not sure what they mean by maternal bias. If we could get more clarification.
In the workplace?
Maternal bias in the workplace? Maybe.
Yeah, I guess maybe the workplace. It seems like the workplace.
Yeah, you know, I think women generally recognize that they aren't as productive, or they feel like they can't be as productive when they're pregnant. And we worry about how that's going to impact our colleagues and our job and so on. But that comes down to working or finding an environment that is woman friendly or maternity friendly. Of course, I work at the world famous Mayo Clinic, which is one of the best places to work in terms of at least acknowledging and recognizing life goes on beyond the walls of Mayo Clinic. I'll even just say my niece is now on staff at Mayo Rochester for 3 years. After a year, she got pregnant, and she's an interventional radiologist, which means she works urgent stuff all the time. She too felt, oh, can I get pregnant? Shouldn't I get pregnant? They certainly timed it so it would be less impactful to her colleagues. But her colleagues said, yeah, we're a family. We help each other's out. And maybe it's maternity, maybe it's an illness for another colleague down the road that we have to, change schedules and be flexible. So I don't think women really need to be as concerned about themselves in terms of the pregnancy. The problem is society and then potentially the work environment you might find yourself in. And unfortunately, there probably are still work environments that are not maternity friendly. And again, I probably wouldn't be working for those.
Right. So let me just say this, our time is up. It flew by. There's so many more questions. Perhaps we can gather them and maybe get some more answers from you. We could also say that you are at the Mayo Clinic's Women's Health Specialty Center.
Yes, I want to make sure that we recognize that this has been a collaborative effort across specialties. So it's not just Stephanie and I, it's dermatologists like Dr. Bruce,
yes.
And gynecology, cardiology. It's been a group effort to bring a place for women to go to get their women's health specific questions answered. It's not a primary care service, but it is a place to go to get answers.
It feels like a field trip to me. I think we just got to come. All of us just got to come. Everybody, thank you both. I have to just say it's just a joy to be able to be with you, to learn from you. So incredibly helpful. You're caring, you're impressive, but your humanity just shines through, and we want to thank you so much for that. In terms of like a couple of takeaways, I have my notes right here. I love when Jackie said we have to be the captain of our process, and all of the stuff Stephanie has talked about, and I think so much greater depth can be shared about being prepared and asking questions and knowing about the health disparities, not only amongst women of color, but also just about between gender specific, will be really helpful as we go forward. So lots of learning today, ladies. Thank you so much. I want to say to all of you there, save the date, September 11th. It's official. Put it on your calendar. We will gather, yes, virtually, but we promise that Generation W will be the fuel that lifts our spirit and your soul. That special time each year where that power of connection enables all of us to rise. We have amazing speakers that are committed, and we will have more to come, but just put it on your calendar. For many of you, it's already been there, so just hold that slot. We decided that that's the best way we can do it, is to schedule for the day that we all schedule to be together, September 11th. And speaking of Generation W, we have such a great community, as you all know, and it continues to grow, and we're happy to share news from one of our great speakers. I think you might remember her, Gay Gaddis. She was the author of, oh, there you are. There you are, Gay. She is the author of Cowgirl Power, How to Kick Ass in Business and Life, and she's running a series of live leadership webinars. The first one's tonight, there's one on the 29th, one in August, and she has offered anyone associated with Generation W, all of our community, 15% off all of her tickets using the promo code GenW. I love when we can come together and work like this. So if anyone has any interest, if you need more information, you can give our office a call. And for next week, yet another proud alumnus. I'm so pleased that we have the celebrated speaker and specialist in communications, Erica Dewan. With our major shift to digital, we know there's a lot to better understand on how to connect in our new virtual world. She is truly an expert in that. She's the founder and CEO of her company, Potential. She's the author of Get Big Things Done, The Power of Connectional Thinking and Intelligence. And it's something we can all get refreshed about. So hopefully we'll see you next week, Wednesday noontime. Thank you to Generation W, all of our folks, Sherry, Stacy, Jamie, Kasha, Christina, Tara, Elizabeth, Ruth, and Mariah. Thanks for joining us. And a specific request. Next week, please, the more the merrier, with love of each one of you, just bring one friend, bring a friend. We would love to continue to grow our audience and bring this great content to as many people who can benefit. Remember, together we are powerful, together we are not alone, and together we can be healthier. Thanks again, Dr. Stephanie and Dr. Jackie. Remember, save the date, September 11th, and we'll see you next week.